Online superhero movie discourse often boils down to either, "This is the greatest film of all time, a cinematic triumph, Orson Welles himself would be jealous," or "Martin Scorsese was right, this is hot garbage, is this the end of the MCU?" And as with most matters of opinion on the World Wide Web, there is little room for nuance. Opinions, as they say, are like assholes. Everybody's got one, and I only want to see certain people's on the internet. Wait. But if there's one thing I've learnt about movies, it's that nobody ever sets out to make a bad one, and very few of them are completely without merit. With that in mind, I've compiled a list of 10 superhero movies with the worst critical consensuses, and the challenge is I'm going to have to say at least one nice thing about each of them. Hey heroes, I'm Josh from Panels to Pixels, and I'm not going to lie to you, looking at some of the movies on this list, this is going to be a tough one. Alright, kicking things off with 2005's Fantastic Four. And this one is dated, sure, but much in the same way that the original Stan Lee and Jack Kirby comics are a time capsule of the 60s, they're very much of that time period, with pop culture references and even turns of phrases that Stan Lee uses. I think this 2005 movie is very much a time capsule of the mid-2000s. Ioan Gruffudd is legitimately great as Reed Richards. I think he does a really great job at riding that line between being dorky and this kind of mad professor persona that I think is essential to Reed Richards, but he's also, heroic and he's likable. He's not such a weirdo scientist that you don't kind of fall in love with him. But honestly, I think the movie's greatest strength is the relationship between Ben Grimm, as played by Michael Chiklis, and Johnny Storm, as played by Captain America himself, Chris Evans. The dialogue between these two is straight out of the original comics. It gets all of that Stan Lee banter between the Human Torch and the Thing. And look, I'm not sure if this is a hot take or not, but I like this first movie quite a great deal more than I like the sequel, Rise of the Silver Surfer, because I still think that this first one, feels like the Fantastic Four. It really does feel like the 60s Fantastic Four to me. That's the nicest thing I can say about it. My hope going forward with the Fantastic Four in the MCU is they don't try to make them too cool and too slick, because they should be a bit goofy, and that's what this film is. 2011's Green Lantern really feels like two movies mashed together to me. There's all this quite conceptual sci-fi stuff, like really hardcore sci-fi stuff that they lean hard into. It almost feels like Star Trek or something like that. And there's all this beautiful imagery of the planet Oa and all the suits, all the character designs. It's really quite mesmerizing to look at. And then this other half of the movie, which doesn't really work as well, is the Ryan Reynolds vehicle, with all these typical yuck jokes and I'm just saying things in a deadpan way. Those two separate halves don't really mix for me, but the sci-fi stuff really works, and I wish they'd just committed to that. The visuals really are spectacular, like even the glowing CGI suits look cool in my opinion. Mark Strong looks absolutely perfect as Sinestro, and he really rises to the occasion doing a very sincere, campy, comic book character performance. Green Lantern was supposed to be the start of a DC cinematic universe, and that was ultimately abandoned and reorientated around Man of Steel, which, arguably a mistake, I would say. I think DC are still floundering and recovering from that decision. I'm not saying that a cinematic universe based around Green Lantern would have been any better, but I am curious to see what a DC universe that was more in line with the traditional comic books, as this film is, might have looked like. 1997's Spawn, hell yeah. Okay, one nice thing about Spawn, the soundtrack. Enough said. I've already covered this in a video with my mate Matty. We talked all about how this is just an absolute banger soundtrack. Okay, but you want me to talk about this movie more than that. So, Spawn the motion picture is all style and no substance. And in that way, it's kind of a perfect adaptation of the source material. Look, if you follow the channel, you know that I love the Spawn comics. But they're just vibes, it's not great storytelling. They're not exactly brain food. And I think Spawn the movie creates such a good atmosphere, with some great comic book moments translated directly from the page. There's this one shot of Spawn on the church with his big CGI cape flowing, and he just looks so badass. I like rewatching this movie just for that one moment. And look, while some of the effects in this movie look pretty horrendous, I'm looking at you, army of Spawns in hell, there's actually some really great VFX in here as well. The puppet they built for the close-up of Violator is legitimately incredible. It looks amazing. And then, of course, there's John Leguizamo's performance as Violator, who is appropriately detestable, especially in his clown form. The dude ate live maggots for this movie. You can't question his commitment to the role. Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. Oh boy, this one could get controversial. So I watched this one just a couple of weeks ago, and I actually quite like this movie, as a movie. But as a Batman and Superman movie, it's just wild. Like, I can't believe that Warner Brothers try to headline the DC Cinematic Universe with these versions of Batman and Superman. Because I actually think this really works as an Elseworlds version of the characters. You've got your Batman, who is this Dark Knight Returns-esque, grim and gritty version of the character, and then you have this Superman who is more morally ambiguous, which is totally not the point of Superman, to be morally ambiguous. The first shot we see of Superman is him landing with this really angry expression. And look, I know that people are going to say, well, of course he would be angry, or, he'd be aggressive because he's there to save Lois Lane, someone he cares about personally. But it just doesn't scream Superman to me. I don't think that's the vision of Superman that should be leading a cinematic universe. But look, this is supposed to be saying one nice thing, so let's get back on track. You cannot argue that Zack Snyder isn't a director with a great sense of visual style. Like, he's a true auteur. And this film just oozes style. It really does. I think it's a fantastic watch. There's so much texture to this film in a way that a lot of modern superhero movies are severely lacking in texture. Frankly, I would like this film a lot more if you just cut out the nightmare sequences, because they add nothing to the plot of the film. They don't really do a lot of character development. I understand the arguments for them being there, but they are ultimately subtractive to the experience, in my opinion. Next up, Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. We've just had the DCEU, so it's only fair to have some MCU representation in here, and what better than the most recent installment, which has landed with a bit of a thud, really. I actually really didn't hate this film when I saw it about a month ago in cinemas. I don't think it's terrible at all, but I can see why it's not connecting with audiences. Tonally, it just feels a bit all over the place. It's got these high-level sci-fi concepts about multiple timelines and quantum physics, but there's really no substance there. It's just a sci-fi veneer over a generic family film that is probably too conceptual for kids to enjoy, to be honest. I think a lot of this would go over a kid's head. That being said, I am a bit bummed out that MODOK was burned on this appearance, and that he won't be George Tarleton in the MCU, especially because we've already established that AIM exists in Iron Man 3. But at the end of the day, MODOK is a bit of a novelty villain. He's not a Thanos-level threat. He is a goofy villain, so it's fine. Turn him into a joke, that's fine. But onto the good. I think this is a really enjoyable kind of throwback romp to kind of space operas of years gone by. It feels like a Flash Gordon serial type thing. I've seen a lot of people comparing it to Star Wars in that way, and I definitely see that comparison. I think the creature designs in the quantum realm are really unique and fun visually, and I think just this idea of a world within the quantum realm, I think that would really have sparked my imagination as a kid. I would have found that exciting. So not a perfect film, not even a great film really, but I think it's getting a lot more hate than it deserves. Catwoman. Whew, okay, what can I say about this one? I suppose the nicest thing I can say about it is that it's unintentionally hilarious. There are just so many moments in this film that make me laugh out loud whenever I watch it. This is a really fun one to watch with friends in a, so bad it's good kind of way. Sharon Stone is the villain here, and she's hamming it up like you would not believe. Her performance is really fun, actually. Halle Berry is giving absolutely nothing. So Catwoman was directed by Pitoff, and this one is quite similar to Spawn really, because it was directed by a VFX guy turned director. And he goes absolutely balls to the wall with some of the shots in this movie. I've got to respect that. He does these insane aerial shots with a wibbly-wobbly CGI ragdoll of Halle Berry flipping and flopping around. It's just bonkers. And he's also doing all these crazy Dutch angles all the time. And the look of the world itself feels very comic book-esque and almost has this retro futurist minimalist feel to it. It's hard to describe, but it almost has this European vibe to it. I don't know if I'm giving it too much credit, but it feels kind of like Mobius's artwork, some of the cityscapes. It's quite bizarre. Definitely worth a watch if you haven't watched this one for a while, or if you've never seen it. It's not good, but it's entertaining. X-Men: The Last Stand. So here we have the capper for the original X-Men movie trilogy, and I quite like this one. I do not think that this is anywhere near as bad as people say. It starts off really strong with this danger room sequence, which the first time I saw this, I was fist pumping the air. I just thought this was exactly what I wanted to see from an X-Men movie. I think this movie's biggest flaw really is that it was trying to do too much. It was trying to adapt 3 different storylines from the comics, and just one of those, the Dark Phoenix saga, deserved its own movie really, which it later got. But I think it's ultimately a well-made film. I hesitate to compliment Brett Ratner because Elliot Page has spoken very openly about his experiences on the film and how unpleasant that was around Brett Ratner. So I don't want to praise this movie. I mean, to be honest, most of the X-Men filmography has got problematic directors, so, But the absolute number one thing that this movie has going for it, and why I think it's a legitimately good X-Men movie, is Kelsey Grammer as Beast. I think this is genuinely one of the best castings in all of comic book movies. Like, it kind of baffles me that this doesn't get thrown around in the same mentions as Robert Downey Jr. as Tony Stark or Patrick Stewart as Professor X. He is absolutely pitch perfect, and he looks great. The design looks better in this film than it did in later films with Nicholas Hoult as Beast. I just think this is an absolutely chef's kiss performance, and it kind of breaks my heart that we didn't get to see more of Kelsey Grammer as Beast. This is definitely a flawed film, but I don't think it's a bad film whatsoever. I think this easily holds its own in that original X-Men trilogy. 1997's Batman and Robin, here we go. So I think the litmus test for whether or not you're on board with this movie seems to be what you think of Uma Thurman's performance as Poison Ivy. Because I think if you buy into what she's doing as this pulpy, over-the-top comic book femme fatale, then you get it. I think you get what Joel Schumacher was trying to do with this movie. It's absolutely packed with Silver Age silliness. He was trying to take it back to that 60s idea of Batman, and I just don't think that's where Batman was culturally at the time. I think that's this film's biggest failing. And also, Batman and Robin was turned around so quickly after the success of Batman Forever that I think it just needed a little more time in the oven. The script definitely needs a punch-up. I think some of Arnold's one-liners don't really make sense. There's some stuff in here that isn't even a joke. And also, I don't really like what George Clooney is doing as Batman. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. He's definitely one of my least favourite cinematic Batmans. But I have to say, visually, this film is a treat. Like, Schumacher's vision of Gotham is so iconic to me. I grew up with the two Joel Schumacher Batmans. They were like my first comic book movies. And this neon Gotham with all these like great big bronze statues of Greek Olympians, it's really stunning. Like, this still informs my idea of Gotham even today. Bloodshot is complete and utter schlock. It really is. But I really appreciate that movies like this continue to get made. It's mostly Sony making them for some reason. It feels like a throwback to the early 2000s to me, before the comic book movie formula had been hammered into complete homogeny by the MCU. It also features the funniest line delivery at one point that my wife and we quote this all the time. There's one point where Vin Diesel just looks over and it just gives the most bizarre, I know Vin Diesel's voice is low, but he says, "I saw my wife in a dream." Why does he sound like that? He sounds like Yoda. "I saw my wife in a dream." Vin Diesel's a weird guy, right? I don't think he's right for this kind of role. He's so uncharismatic and he's just giving nothing at all. And this film really depends on having all this like generic action tropes around a charismatic lead. Diesel works in the Fast and the Furious films because he has all these other much more likable and fun characters that kind of orbit his straight man persona, but he can't really carry a genre film like this. However, I really hope this isn't the end of the proposed Valiant Comics cinematic universe, because there's a lot of meat on the bone there. There was talk of doing a Ninjak film and a Shadow Man, Exo Manowar. There is great characters in there that I would like to see films of, and I didn't hate this one. It's very generic. Let's wrap things up with a classic, derided comic book movie, Spider-Man 3. This film is kind of a mess, clearly there was a lot of studio interference, and you had Avi Arad, representing Toy Biz and saying, you need to get this character and this character in. And look, this may not be the movie that Sam Raimi wanted to make, but in my opinion, it's still 100% a Raimi movie, through and through. I think there has been a lot of reappraisal of this movie, to be honest, so I don't even know if this one would make a list of the worst comic book movies. At this point, in 2023, I think people appreciate things a bit more. The classic emo Peter Parker dancing scene, people have either put more meaning onto it by saying, that's Peter Parker's idea of what being cool is, so that's why it's cringy and, induces this whole body cringe. But also, I just think scenes like that have become iconic because they're so memorable and so weird. I actually think Spider-Man 3 has some of the funniest writing of the trilogy. It's got some great, physical humor moments and great slapstick moments. It's very Sam Raimi to me. There are some trilogies where they don't stick the landing on the third one, and you kind of just, as a fan, you have to imagine that it doesn't exist. You kind of disregard that third installment. Certainly, for every time I've watched Batman Begins and The Dark Knight, I've probably seen The Dark Knight Rises twice in the last 10 years. But I don't think that's the case for Spider-Man 3 at all. I think it stands up with the rest of the trilogy. It's obviously not as good as 1 and 2, but when I watch the trilogy, I watch the whole thing, and I can appreciate it as one whole story. And it still looks great. I mean, even though there's more CGI going on in this film, you've got the design of Venom, it looks fantastic, and the Sandman is ripped straight off the comic book page. I think Spider-Man 3 is a really good time, honestly. And I think its only crime is that it doesn't live up to the masterpiece that is the first two films. There we go, heroes. That's one nice thing about some of the worst superhero movies. I tried my best, okay? Thanks for watching this video. What I want you to do is, in the comments below, I want you to say one nice thing about the worst superhero movie you've ever seen. Tell me what the movie is, and then tell me one good thing about it. Don't forget to subscribe to Panels to Pixels, and give that bell icon a little ring-a-ding-ding so you never miss out on future uploads. Until next time, stay safe, take care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.